The screaming had stopped, the suits were packed away, and the touring was over. And in that silence, the Beatles didn't disappear. They reinvented music entirely. This is the story of how a burnt-out band barely in their 20s walked into Abbey Road Studios as the Beatles and walked out as Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. A psychedelic daydream that not only reinvented music, but the idea of what an album could be. There's really no other way to say it, but they had finally reached the end of the road. In 1966, the Beatles were done with touring. Between near-death scares in the Philippines to John's Bigger Than Jesus controversy and just the constant commotion and chaos from the fans, the mania had finally gotten the best of them. Attempting to hear themselves on stage performing had become a futile effort, and they were just exhausted and anxious and creatively boxed in, which for an artist, that's not exactly ideal. So after their Candlestick Park performance in San Francisco, they walked off that stage and never looked back. And they didn't do anything as far as like a farewell tour or a grand statement or a gesture or anything. No, just radio silence. And then studio time. So there they were, a band who had found themselves at a crossroads. This break was, like any new thing for anyone, mortifying. And at the same time, so freeing. For the first time since they were teens, which is so insane, they had no tour, no screaming fans to deal with, and no militant schedule. All they had was blank space. And what ended up filling that space was an endless abyss of questions. John was mentally and spiritually adrift. He had turned inward and began experimenting with LSD, and he had fully inundated himself into the realm of surrealism. Even his music started to reflect this fractured view of reality, like everything's a little bit distorted and twisted, and he began writing a track that was mesmerizing and haunting about a place from his childhood. Strawberry Fields Forever.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going strawberry fields forever. It's getting hard to be someone, but it all works out.
Paul, on the other hand, got carried away with the vastness of possibilities that were out there. He was completely captivated by the London art scene and got really into experimental theater and avant-garde music, and all that led him to imagining this wild lightning strike idea. What if we created this fake band and wrote an album as them? That idea became Sgt. Pepper. George over there was now full-on engulfed in Indian music and spirituality. He was done chasing charts, over it. He was all about meaning. Sitar, tabla, transcendence, meaning. That was George's focus now. Ringo, still the steady center, still that beating heart. But he was always way more comfortable in the studio than he ever was on stage anyway, so worked out for him. And what's really interesting here is that even though they're all on their separate journeys and it seems like they're all kind of going in separate directions, the common thread that was weaved between all of them was the direction that led them towards the wonder of Sgt. Pepper. So what do we get? The music starts to mutate and shapeshift. Before Sgt. Pepper, they recorded and released a single that should have been on the record, I'll say it, but wasn't. Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane.
Penny Lane, there is a barber showing photographs. Stop and say hello. Penny Lane is in my ears.
Two nostalgic, dreamlike, fantastical songs. One John, one Paul. Two sides of the same coin, memory and myth. Many critics considered it the greatest double A side of all time, bar none. But because of EMI's no singles on albums policy, they had to leave it off. And you know what I have to say about that? Tomato, tomato. Imagine leaving those off the album and it's still being considered one of the most influential records of all time. By now, they were hitting the ground running, building what would become Sgt. Pepper. Recording began in November of 1966, and you gotta remember, there was no time limit, there was no schedule they needed to adhere to, no pressure to record. Just pure creation was happening. Artists doing art. Paul's concept was playful and jovial, a fictional band performing a fictional concert. It was so alleviating and freeing for them. Each song was experimental and colorful and dramatic. Studio technology was being pushed to its limits. George Martin, their legendary producer, said it felt like making a symphony, a painting, and a novel simultaneously. They slowed down tapes, reversed vocals, blended orchestras with guitars, and added sound effects and layered in laughter, crowd noise, even sitars and circus organs. There were no more rules. Just pure imagination. I'm so sorry I had to take a quick intermission and get a jacket because it is freezing and I have a huge headache and it's all like right here. But anyway, to continue with the story. So let's talk tracks. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. John's kaleidoscope of a dreamscape. It's whimsical and surreal and actually deeply misunderstood. No, it's not about LSD. At least not intentionally.
Girl with kaleidoscope eyes.
She's leaving home. Paul's heartbreaking ballad of a girl running away. It's layered with luscious strings and raw emotion.
Leaving the note that she hoped would say more. We gave her most of our lives.
Within You, Without You, George's spiritual centerpiece. It's drenched in Indian instrumentation and philosophy. A Day in the Life. Oh, now, what can anyone say about this song? It's John and Paul's paragon. Two songs, two realities, woven together by a hectic, tumultuous orchestra crescendo. And it ends on this final chord that echoes and resonates into forever. And if you couldn't tell, A Day in the Life is a very personal song to me. It's one of my favorites in the world.
I read the news today, oh boy. Woke up, fell out of bed.
Another driver of this vivid, popping whimsy, wonder, and fantasy of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is that the visuals were just as stunning and refreshing and revolutionary as the sound. The album cover was this fabulous Technicolor collage of celebrities, mystics, icons, wax figures, and it was brought to life and designed by pop artists Peter Blake and Jan Howarth. The Beatles, dressed like a Victorian marching band standing over a grave, marked the Beatles. Symbolic? Who's to say? Maybe. But one thing's clear. It said this: the Beatles couldn't come to the phone right now. Why? Oh, because they were gone. These were new men, new minds, new music. The attention and care into the most minute of details was impeccable. Even the packaging was radical. The lyrics were printed on the back, had gatefold sleeve, cut out inserts. No one was out here doing it like this. No one. On May 26, 1967, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band was released in the UK. In the US, it dropped on June 2nd. And it changed everything. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece. And it stayed at #1 in the UK for 27 weeks. And it won not 1, not 2, but 4 Grammys. And it was revered as the first true concept album. Rolling Stone later called it the greatest album of all time. But you know what? Forget all the awards. That's a wrap on all the superficiality. You want to know the real impact? It made albums matter. It told musicians you could be artists, that pop music didn't have to be throwaway, disposable. It paved the way to Pink Floyd, Bowie, Queen, and Prince. Sgt. Pepper broke the frame and allowed music to supersede just the world of sound. But unfortunately, behind the scenes of all that brilliance, there were cracks in the foundation. John was further getting more detached. He later said that Sgt. Pepper felt like Paul's album, and then that in turn made Paul feel the weight of leadership and holding the vision together and pushing the band forward. George was over on his own cloud, feeling spiritually isolated. He was just frustrated that his Indian explorations weren't being fully embraced. Even Ringo admitted he sometimes felt like an extra in his own band. Now, none of this takes away from the fact that Sgt. Pepper was a triumph, but also a turning point. They had done it. They climbed that mountain. As Kate Bush might say, they ran up that hill. But now they'd have to decide where to go next. The Beatles were no longer just a band. They had stepped into becoming a force, a revolution in real time. With Sgt. Pepper, they altered the functionality of the entire music industry. It was art, it was story, it was theater, it was real, it was fantasy, it was serious, it was fun. From here on out, going back would never be an option, ever again.